Mr. Dan Zamoyski. There he is. Let me see, international Polish activist and deputy leader of the Polish Media Issues, PMI, group, Morpeth, United Kingdom. Distortion of Polish World War II history by the media, academia, politicians, and its consequences. Auschwitz survey. Mr. Zamoyski.
Thank you.
Got 20 minutes.
Well, I'm going to try to organize these microphones so that you can hear me and I can see my screen here. There. Can you hear me all right? Oh, good, thank you. Good afternoon. And down a bit. Oh, yeah. Okay, yes. No, that's good. Thank you. Yes. Righto. Ready to go. Thank you. I'm recovering from something, so I hope I don't dry up, but I've got something here to help me. So, I want to talk to you for the next 20 minutes about the distortions of Polish World War II history. And also I'm including some results from a research survey that was done in the UK in 2015 with 2,000 adults showing their relative knowledge or ignorance about Poland and World War II in Auschwitz. Next slide, please. If you've read my rather extensive bio on the website, then you'll know all this, but for those you might not have seen it, my ancestry in Poland goes back to many, many years, obviously, but in terms of 1911, my grandparents came from Poland, emigrated to the USA, and then therefore my parents were born there, I was born there, but since 1981, I've lived and worked in England, and I've been a management consultant since 1990. I'm currently semi-retired, meaning I have clients who occasionally give me some work, but I'm trying to be retired. And I spend most of my time, therefore, being what I've evolved into, an international Polonia activist. I didn't try to get there, it just came my way. Mainly by joining the Polish Media Issues group in 2011. That group was started in 2005 by 5 people who were sick and tired of seeing Polish death camp not challenged in the media. And now, of course, everything is very digital, and we have about 2,500 people on our Facebook page, and we have hundreds of issues we deal with every year. So if you haven't heard of Polish Media Issues Group, please do have a look at our Facebook page. We also have a website, which is, let's see, polishmediaissues.online. And we have a Twitter thing as well, if you can find that. I'll just try to get back now. In terms of Polish Media Issues, that's been the core of where I have learned things about Polish history and distortion of Polish history. So that's the theme of what I'm going to be speaking about. Now, next slide, please. Now, I'm going to speak to you about the distortion of Polish World War II history in 3 areas by media globally, by academia, and by politicians, which includes the Auschwitz survey and the ramifications of that. So let's see where we are. Perfect, righto. Media-wise, you've already seen the information that Dr. Błaziak put on the screen on day 1 regarding Netflix and the fact that our Polish Prime Minister has gone to bat big time, and Polish Media Issues and doubtless others, to get that terrible situation changed with the maps. I'm not so sure what changes they're going to make yet, but I hope they're the right ones. But you can see the BBC is a big organization. It is one which has been going for many, many decades, and yet I cannot call it Poland's friend all the time, maybe that often. So I have one slide to deal with that later on. But German publishers, Israeli, in Florida there's a particular hotspot of those who Polish Media Issues picks up, which are offenders. I don't mean just Polish death camps, Polish Nazis, Polish ghettos, and also saying things that are in Poland during World War II, but they don't use the O word, the occupied word. And they almost never use the G word, they use a Nazi word. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I can't see us retiring soon. The Irish Times is also, particularly for some reason, vehement defender. They don't make changes. These are just some examples. But WAPO, which is Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, the mainstream news in general do not treat Poland as fairly as they should. I will say this, I have seen improvements in certain areas. There's less offenses, which is good. I've also found that when we speak to people who are just ignorant of Poland's past, blogs, small local newspapers, often they say, oh, thank you very much for letting us know, we didn't realize. So there's a lot of positives in doing this, fighting the battle of getting the truth about Poland out there. But it's also a lot of hard work. Now, I want to think of George Orwell. Next slide, please. Now, you will all have heard of George Orwell. The words at the bottom, I hope you can read them. It says, the people will believe what the media tells them they believe. That's a quote from many decades ago, before he wrote 1984. In this day and age, what are we seeing? We're seeing lies put out as truth, and people are believing them. Next slide, please. Another Orwell quote here. And this is painfully true for Poles, and others, but also for Poles. Truth, it's the new hate speech. And Orwell said it so many years ago, during times of universal deceit, and boy, have we got that. Telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And I can tell you, on behalf of Polish media issues, we are called revolutionaries, and a lot worse, by saying, these are the historical facts. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, but that's where they are. Next slide, please. More examples of the media and how they distort things. The Stutthof camp was always in Germany until the borders shifted after World War II, then it became in free Poland, relatively free Poland. However, the headline you see there, where it says concentration camp in Poland, has been changed fairly promptly, which is nice, but that's what it said originally. And as you know, the media has a short lifetime. People see it for the first hour, day, maybe, and then it's gone. If they make a change the next day, most people who saw the wrong information don't see the corrected information. And it's especially true if it's days and weeks later. So it's a tough battle. Next slide, please. Now, recently we had the Independence Day Parade in Warsaw, always a good occasion. Last year was phenomenal. This year was also extremely good. I wasn't there, sadly, but in this case, there's a German newspaper and calls it a hate march. And they know far better than to call it that, but this is what we got. Next slide, please. Now, I don't know who is behind that particular headline of putting hate speech in there, but this Berlin newspaper mogul, Holger Friedrich, used to work for the Stasi. It comes out now in the 70s. I believe maybe late 60s, I can't recall now. But he was one of thousands and thousands and thousands, not just post-World War II enemies who are now living a normal free life, but those from East Germany as well, who have just transmogrified into what were nasty people into, oh, I'm a normal citizen now. Never prosecuted for their crimes, and never will be. Next slide, please. Now, I have a great respect for the Queen of England. Totally, I have two passports, American and British, and I thoroughly respect the Queen. This was not the Queen's doing. You'll see in the next slide what I mean. This was a D-Day celebration, commemorations last year. And you can see the Queen is there meeting the D-Day allies. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, in the receiving line, there was this German. And the other headline, the other line that was written with this was, "The Queen meets participants on D-Day." Well, that's true. Absolutely true. But the headline was pretty horrendous. It was noticed. Next slide, please. Now, another unfortunate use. Notice the company, you see the AP up there? They're still at it. Now, this is what Chancellor Merkel said. She was at these D-Day commemorations. Of course, she's invited. We're all friends now. Yeah, that's fine. So Merkel says, if you can read that, "This unique military operation eventually brought us the liberation from the Nazis." I thought, whoa, which planet are they from, these Nazis? And of course, you can see in the photo, someone else made this into a meme and said, "Picture the Germans who can't wait until the Allies liberate them from the Nazis." So hopefully we'll be able to get a copy of this, if you wish, from the things available from the website. But next slide, please. So some of the things we see are humorous. Some make our blood boil, but sometimes we have some fun with them like that. Now, this one particularly made us at Polish Media Issues, and I think anyone who read it, quite angry. Because you can see on your left-hand side there, hysterical lying headlines, making it look like it's Poles who are at fault. And the actual fact are, these were Israeli students assaulted by Qatari youth, but in Warsaw. And that took, I think, a couple of days to get sorted out. So most people who saw that said, "Oh, these Poles attacking Jews in Poland, how could they do that?" Unfortunately, part of the distortion. And none of this helps. Next slide, please. Now, I was very pleased to see the Prime Minister of Poland, Morawiecki, make such a strong comment to Netflix. And things happen fairly quickly in terms of, yes, we will change. But I'm not sure what actually the changes are going to be. I've heard they're balking at actually changing the actual map. We'll find out later what they really are going to do. Does anyone know if it has been changed officially yet in the film? Probably not. That'll take some time, you see. So I hope they do what they should do. We'll find out. Again, even if they agree to make changes, these publishers, you don't know what you're going to get till you get it. And sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're not so happy. Next slide, please. Now, what can I say about the BBC? This is absolutely spot on, sadly. There have been booklets made. There's one of our PMI colleagues, one of our founders, Jan Jekvedovich, who's written a number of small booklets about the way that the BBC and others have actually told lies or been selective with the truth, or when they talk about occupied countries, occupied France, occupied Belgium, occupied this, they almost never say occupied Poland. So, why that happens, who does it, very hard to say. But it's really unfortunate, and it happens a lot, which is why I like this particular little meme here. It's unfortunately true. Next slide, please. Now, you'd think most people would recognize that Auschwitz is not a Polish word. Now, a lot of Brits, a lot of Americans, maybe even the French, Italians, they might not, but you'd think by now they would have heard enough of Auschwitz German to get this right, but maybe not. So this particular little thing here, I use it as an example to send to people sometimes, you know, have you realized this TZ, or TZ, is German, whereas CZ or CZ is Polish? Now, most people wouldn't, most non-Poles wouldn't necessarily realize that. But we have a big education program on. Next slide, please. Now, when it came to covering distortions of the Polish World War II history by academia, I could spend the whole day on that, but we don't have time. So I just wanted to cover the main people that you probably mostly already know about. But J.T. Gross and his neighbor's books, etc. Jan Grabowski in Canada. Barbara Engelking in Poland. There are some in the Polish Academy of Sciences, I am told, who are very anti-Polish. What they're doing in that academy, I can't imagine, but that's another matter. I'm sure there's some people here who could tell me the answer, and I look forward to telling me later. And in academia, the ones who are mainly the anti-Polish happen to be ethnically Jewish. That's just a statement of fact, sadly. Next slide, please. Now, you will probably all have heard of Norman Davis. He recently published a book in which it's mentioned, next slide please, that this professor who was in charge in 1974 of indoctrinating these UK authors, historical authors, made these points. Any mention that the Polish nationals were also victims during the war was denied, meaning the question, weren't they victims? Oh, no, no, no. Next slide, please. Can I ask, how many of you have heard of G.K. Chesterton? I'm seeing maybe a dozen hands, so not everyone. And he was a well-known religious writer and very well respected and a protege of C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe series, etc. So I won't read this out now due to time, but if you can have a look at it later, it's a very, very evocative and interesting statement. Okay. Now, I'll read to this next few quickly because we're out of time, or we're getting close to time. So, the consequences of historical distortion are vast, massively vast for Poland and Poles. No reparations, smear Christianity, false creation of Polish Nazis, no, never existed. Polak jokes, which I've heard a few. Infamous charging German tanks on horses, it's a lie, etc. Next slide, please. By politicians, the distortions, you will have heard, I'm sure, the many by the Israeli politicians, Katz, Yammer, Lapid, Rivlin, and others. I think Hussein Netanyahu as well, but I'm not sure if he's a politician still or not. Not sure what the situation is. In the USA, we have the infamous S-447 bill. President Obama said Polish death camps at a Freedom Medal Award for Jan Karski. How can that be? And there's a chap named Verhofstadt in the EU called the marchers last year fascists. And Timmermans is no good. There are various ones in the next slide, please. Now, due to massive Polish casualties in World War II, I think I've got the right. Oops, hold on. Next slide, please. There we go. And you can't read this, so look at it in your notes perhaps later on, but Poland was proportionally the highest loss of people, civilians and soldiers during the whole war by a long factor. Again, you'll probably know many of these things yourself. Next slide, please. And this gives another summary of why German war reparations are certainly deserving to be paid to Poland. Next slide. Okay. This is self-explanatory, but we have tried to preach this message out so that there are some groups, or a group that thinks that they're the only victims, sadly. Next slide. You'll like this one. Why Germany doesn't want to pay Poland war reparations. Germany won't pay Poland war reparations because Germany claims that the Polish government decided in 1953 that they won't pay any reparations. Next slide, please. Enough said. Sadly, sadly true. Now, anti-Semitism has been weaponized big time. And if you can look at this thing quickly, there's a certain group spreading lies about Poles. And when the Poles spread the information back, then there's trouble. You're being anti-Semitic. This is the well-known frame, which you've seen many, I've been called on this many times, and I'm not the least bit. Next slide, please. In fact, go to the next slide as well, please. This is the research I mentioned that we did regarding Auschwitz. And I'm going to go through these very quickly now because I have very little time. So if you want, you can take photos, and hopefully it will all be legible. But we asked two questions there. Which of any of the following countries created the Auschwitz concentration death camp? And the second question is, which of the governments did not collaborate with the Nazis? Next slide, please. Those are the countries that could be chosen, and they rotated in order. Next slide, please. So who created Auschwitz? 85%. This is UK adults, 2,000 of them. Germany, 85%. Poland, 10%. They think 10%, okay. Austria, 8%. The Austrians are less to blame than the Poles for Auschwitz. Next slide, please. Now this was disturbing, but in Scotland, 18% selected Poland, whereas in the eastern part of the country, 7%. In Wales, 4%. That's a big disparity in one country. And it's very disturbing for Poles in Scotland, I think. Next slide, please. And which government were not Nazi collaborators? This is utterly shocking. Take a picture if you want, because we don't have time to really spend on it in detail. But the fact that 27% thought Great Britain collaborated with the Nazis is astounding. And the fact that 34% didn't realize that Poland did not collaborate. Your country's overrun, so what it demonstrates, and the Austrians are equally bad, next slide please, is that there was a vast amount of ignorance. And that's the UK. USA, I'm quite certain it's even worse. Again, these are splits male, female. These are worrying on the female side, in my view. So I can't, there isn't time to go through these. I'm trying to do too much today perhaps, but next slide please. There we go. I'll just say more education and working together. Next slide. Now, can you see this clearly enough? There's a frog there. And you can see he's not giving up. And that's what we need to be. With this battle we've got on of distortion of information media, don't ever give up. Now, I can tell that that frog is a Polish frog. Can you? He looks a bit tad Polish to me. Sorry, couldn't resist. Sorry, bad enough. Now, I'm just finishing up now. I've got 2 more slides. If we can go to the next slide, please. There we are. How many of you heard the expression being at loggerheads? Only a third of you. It means you just can't disagree. Well, I drove to the English countryside once and I came across this sign, I couldn't believe it. There's a place called Loggerheads. So when you're at Loggerheads, that must be what they mean. And hopefully, when Poloni gets together to try and find solutions for these difficult situations, we don't meet there. All right, next slide, please. Now, this is my final slide, I think. Just about nearly. Well, have a read of that. Is it legible? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. I used this years ago when there was an election on in the UK. Well, there's elections on in the UK again. Big, important elections. We got some in the USA coming up. We had some recently in Poland. That little phrase is always true, so be careful what you believe. Next slide, please. Now, one of my solutions for these problems that we have of distortion media and lies about Poland and Poles and being extorted for billions for things that Poland does not owe, S447, I'm starting up an organization called Proud to be Polish. On the table over there, the second from the door, you'll find some business cards. Please take one. There's information on both sides. Take a pen or two if you like. And before I'm done, I will put a sign-up sheet there, because I'd like to keep in touch with anyone who wants to be keeping in touch with me on this. Here is what it's, next slide, please. Yes, that's what's on the business cards. So you don't have to copy that, they're over there on the cards. But I should mention, this is in development, so the website and emails probably aren't working right now. So I'm going to write down there my own email address. I'm not going to put it on here. So if you want to keep in touch, you can write that one down instead until these other ones become fully active, okay? Last slide.